which is a statement from the First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, on COVID-19. The First Minister, as always, will take questions following her statement. I would encourage all members who wish to ask a question to press their request to speak button, and I call on the First Minister.
Thanks, Presiding Officer. Last week, I updated Parliament on the Scottish Government's strategic framework. When I update Parliament next week, I hope to be able to confirm some changes to the Level 4 restrictions between now and then, and in light of the positive data that I will report on today, we will be considering if it might be possible to accelerate the exit from lockdown in any way, consistent, of course, with the care and caution that we know continues to be necessary. Later today, the Public Health Minister will support the resumption of competitive football in Scottish Leagues 1 and 2, the Scottish Women's Premier League 1, and for the purposes of playing Scottish Cup ties, certain Highland League teams. And I hope this news will be welcomed by football fans across the country. The focus of my statement today, though, is education. In particular, I'll update Parliament on plans to get all children back to school on a full-time basis as soon as possible. First, though, I'll give a brief summary of today's statistics. The total number of positive cases reported yesterday was 542. That's 4.4% of tests carried out, and the total number of cases is now 203,012. 784 people are now in hospital, 40 fewer than yesterday. 71 are in intensive care, which is the same as yesterday. I'm sorry to say, though, that in the past 24 hours, a further 33 deaths have been registered, and the total number of deaths under the daily measurement is now 7,164. And again, I want to send my condolences to everyone who has lost a loved one. Yesterday, of course, we marked the anniversary of the first case of COVID being confirmed in Scotland. The Scottish Government is currently talking to health charities and family organisations about how we intend to remember all those who have lost their lives and also mark the many sacrifices that people have made. And we intend to say more about this soon. I'll also give a short update on the vaccination programme. As of 8:30 this morning, 1,634,361 people have received a first dose of the vaccine. That's an increase of 22,783 since yesterday. There is, of course, good and increasing evidence that vaccination is already reducing the number of deaths, particularly in care homes. In time, as a growing proportion of the population gains protection through vaccination, it should also start to have an impact on hospitalisations and on transmission rates. There was further positive news yesterday with the report from Public Health England that a first dose of the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine reduces the chance of needing hospital treatment by more than 80%. And of course, that confirms research published last week in Scotland by the University of Edinburgh. We remain on course to offer the first dose to everyone over 50, all unpaid carers and all adults with an underlying health condition by mid-April. We may face some supply issues next week, we understand, which could affect appointments, but we're working hard to try to avoid that. And I want to stress that these issues will not affect the mid-April target. In addition to the progress on vaccination, we're making good progress at suppressing the virus. I said last week that the decline in case numbers had appeared to slow down and that this was a concern. However, I'm pleased to report this week that more recent data has been much more encouraging, and it strongly suggests that cases are still declining. This time last week, we were recording an average of 815 new cases a day, and that has now fallen to 657 new cases a day on average, and this is the lowest level since the first week of October last year. The average test positivity rate has also fallen and is now below 5%. Hospital admissions are also falling. In the first half of January, more than 1,000 COVID patients a week were being admitted to hospital. In the week up to 23rd February, that had fallen to 468, and the number in intensive care has also continued to decline. So the sacrifices that everyone is making are undoubtedly having an impact. Collectively, we are suppressing the virus and lives are being saved as a result. There is, I think, more reason to be optimistic now than perhaps at any time since early autumn last year. That said, we know we need to take care to avoid sending progress into reverse. 657 new cases a day might be the lowest level for 5 months, but it is still 13 times higher than the numbers being recorded in mid-August. The reduction in hospital admissions is very encouraging, but hundreds of people every week are still falling seriously ill. And we know that the new variant, which now accounts for more than 85% of new cases, is highly infectious. And of course, we have been reminded over the weekend of the significant risk we now face of other new variants, such as the P1 Brazilian variant, being imported into the country. So the news on vaccines and on suppression is overwhelmingly positive. But we must be sensible, and this can be harder to do when things appear to be going in the right direction. But we must continue to be sensible in the decisions we take over the next few weeks if we want to make sure that we keep going in the right direction. And that provides context for the decisions that we have taken this week, and Cabinet confirmed this morning, about our next steps in enabling children to return to school. Those decisions follow consultation with COSLA and local authorities, discussions with the Education Recovery Group and scientific advice from the advisory subgroup on education and children's issues, and that advice will be published tomorrow. Children in primaries 1 to 3 are of course already back at school full time. We continue to monitor the impacts of that, although it is too early to be certain. And some secondary school students have also returned to take part in essential practical work for national qualifications. And childcare and early education premises are also now open for children below school age. The next phase of reopening education will take place on March the 15th. And I can confirm today that from that date, 15th March, unless new evidence or new circumstances force us to reconsider, which we of course hope will not be the case, all children in primary 4 to 7 will go back to school on a full-time basis. All primary school children will also be able to return to regulated childcare, including after-school and breakfast clubs. We'll also take the next steps in a phased return to secondary school from 15th March with a clear expectation that all school pupils, all secondary school pupils will be back in school on a full-time basis following the Easter holidays. However, it is the intention that all secondary school pupils will return to spend some time in school from 15th March until the Easter break. Students in the senior phase of secondary school, that's of course years 4 to 6, who are taking national qualifications will have priority for face-to-face lessons in school. This will ensure that they can have their hard work fairly recognised with qualifications under the alternative certification model. However, although years 4 to 6 may have priority, we expect that all children in secondary school will receive some in-school education each week up until the Easter break and then return full-time following that. This will allow pupils to get used to being back in school and allow them to start seeing friends again. And I'm sure everyone will agree that this is important for the well-being of young people as well as for education. Before Easter, of course, since this will be a blended learning model, we will also continue to ensure that remote learning is of the highest standard possible. Reports from Her Majesty's Inspector of Education have shown that the delivery of remote learning has improved greatly between the first and second lockdowns, and I'm immensely grateful to all of the teachers and other education professionals who've done so much to build on the experience of the first lockdown. We'll work with Education Scotland to ensure that enhanced online resources continue to be available over the coming month, and we will work with local authorities to support young people's well-being in other ways, for example by providing more opportunities for outdoor learning. Education Scotland will publish guidance for local authorities on the phased return over the next few days, and local authorities will have flexibility in how they implement the phased return to allow them to take account of local factors in deciding how to make the return as safe as possible. But we want to ensure that they are able to maximise the number of time that secondary school pupils can safely spend in school in the period up to the Easter holidays. Obviously, we recognise that the safety of staff and children must continue to be a key priority. All local authorities, therefore, will, at least until the Easter break, and indeed this is one of the limitations, continue to observe the current requirement for 2-metre physical distancing in secondary schools. And when secondary schools return, face coverings will need to be worn at all times. The Advisory Group on Education and Children's Issues has also noted the continuing importance of good ventilation. We provided local authorities with £375 million of education recovery funding to date, and many councils are using some of this funding to monitor and improve ventilation in schools. In addition, we'll continue to offer twice-weekly lateral flow testing for all school staff in primary, secondary and special schools and all secondary school pupils in years 4, 5 and 6. And I would encourage as many staff and senior phase pupils as possible to use the tests when they return. It's a further important way to ensure that schools remain as safe as possible. The final point I want to make on schools is simply to say thank you, firstly, to all school leadership teams and all school staff, including, of course, all teachers for everything that has been done to support children and young people in the last few months. I know everyone is looking forward to having children back in the classroom as soon as possible. I also want to thank parents across the country. I can only imagine how difficult all of this disruption continues to be, but I hope and I believe that the end of it is now firmly in sight. And my thanks too to children and young people. I know how hard it must be to be separated from friends and teachers, but you have all responded magnificently to all of the difficulties of the past year, and I hope you're looking forward to getting back to school later this month. And I hope that you will also start to feel life become a lot more normal very soon. The phased approach we're taking to school return can and will be frustrating, I know that, but it is necessary and it is firmly based on the expert advice that we've received. It is the best and also the most sustainable and enduring way to get as many children back to school as possible, as safely as possible. Now, there's one other issue I want to briefly highlight today. I can confirm that we are clarifying guidance on an issue that is directly relevant to parents of newborn children. There are currently a number of essential purposes, for example, essential care, which enable us to go into someone else's house right now. We are amending guidance on this today to make it clear that those essential purposes include support for the welfare and well-being of a parent of a child under the age of 1. And I hope that gives clarity and enables vital support for parents of very young children. Presiding Officer, as we come out of this lockdown, hopefully the last lockdown, we are prioritising, as we said we would, the education and well-being of our children. In addition, although we remain cautious, as we have to be in the face of a dangerous and highly infectious virus, I hope that people will take heart from the data I have reported. It shows real, significant and sustained progress in getting the virus back under control. Next week, I hope to confirm to Parliament the other changes to the Level 4 restrictions that will take effect from the 15th March. And then the week after that, I'm scheduled to set out a firmer timetable for the period after 26 April. As I said at the outset, indeed as I said last week, we will consider between now and then if the data allows us to bring forward any relaxation of the rules. I've always said if we can go further and faster, then we will not hesitate to do so. All of us want to move on as quickly as possible and as a priority to see friends and family again, and that will very much be the focus of our considerations over the next week, and I hope the day for that is now not too far away. But to make sure we don't see any reverse in our progress that would put that in jeopardy, it's really important that for now we all abide by the lockdown rules. So please continue to stick to their letter and their spirit. Stay at home except for essential purposes. Don't meet people from other households indoors. Follow the facts advice when you're out and about. Work from home if you can. And if you're an employer, please continue to support your workers to do so. If we do all of this, we can and we will make it easier for children to return to school and for all of us to return to more normality soon. We'll protect ourselves, our communities and our NHS, and we'll keep the virus under control while vaccinations do their work. So for the moment, please continue to stick with it, stick together and stay at home.
Thank you very much, First Minister. We'll move now to questions. Our first question from Ruth Davidson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer, and thanks to the First Minister for advance notice of her statement. May I also take this first parliamentary opportunity to welcome Anas Sarwar to his new role as Labour leader. It's the 5th time I've been able to do that in my time here, but I truly wish him well, and I extend all offices to work together constructively when it's in Scotland's interest to do so in the weeks ahead, even if it is only weeks that I have. Presiding Officer, the news this week that the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine can reduce hospital admissions by 80% after one dose is welcome indeed. The fact that infection rates, hospitalisation rates and fatalities are all down significantly should be of huge reassurance to us all. This week was also a week of milestones, with more than 20 million people across the UK and 1.5 million across Scotland receiving their first vaccination. Vaccinations, of course, don't just help those receiving the jab, they help us all. And with just over a quarter of adults in Edinburgh now having been vaccinated, up to nearly half in Dumfries and Galloway, the trend is clear. The greater the rollout, the greater reduction in case numbers and the severity of cases. So it is right that the Scottish Government reconsiders its reopening plan for the country with respect to the improved results that we are seeing. And I welcome that Scottish Conservative calls for an earlier return to school for many pupils have been listened to. And while it is hugely welcome to young people's mental health and well-being, their social development and their educational attainment, getting all pupils to return while still observing COVID rules does pose some logistical questions. Face coverings and social distancing are now concepts we take for granted in so many areas of our lives, but teachers and head teachers are rightly asking what support they will receive if their school estate doesn't allow for the 2-metre social distancing in classroom that the government requires of secondary schools. If you can't fit all pupils into their usual classroom with the 2-metre rule, and if you've no extra classrooms or staff to man the split or composite classes created, what support and solutions are going to be made available for them?
First Minister.
Well, all of the developments that I narrated earlier on and have just been reiterated are really welcome. I don't want to overstate this because I don't think it's fair to people. I've tried not to give people false promises on this, but I do think we have every reason now to believe that the exit from lockdown might be quicker and come sooner than we believed would be the case just a few weeks ago. But we know that the worst thing we could do, and what would make that less likely, is if we move too quickly right now and jeopardise the situation that is now beginning to emerge in such a positive way. So that's why we need to be careful, and that caution, as well as a determination to get children back to normal, lies behind the decisions that I've outlined today on schools. We continue to work with schools to make sure that while it is not possible to have all young people back to school as normal, there is a good provision of remote learning for the period between now and Easter. Then there will be a blended learning approach for secondary schools, and we continue to work with schools and local authorities to make sure that that is of the quality that young people and their parents expect. We've given local authorities significant funding to help with practical arrangements in schools. I mentioned ventilation in my opening remarks, but that will cover a range of other things. But key to this, as it was last August when we managed to support the full-time return of school for all pupils and keep schools open virtually for the remainder of last year, the key is to get the virus as low as possible so that as much normality in schools becomes possible and some of the restrictions can be eased, which allows that normality to open up. The additional factor we have now, which we didn't have last August, of course, is what we hope will be the suppressive effect of the vaccine. So these are things we monitor on an ongoing basis, take advice and work with local authorities and schools to facilitate. But I hope that by the time we are coming out of the Easter break, we have further progress that allows much greater normality in our schools than has been possible up until now.
Thank you. Question 2 from Anas Sarwar.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I thank Ruth Davidson for her very kind comments, and I look forward in a matter of weeks to welcoming my second Conservative leader perhaps even my third Conservative leader in my short spell as Labour leader. Can I thank the FM for advance sight of her statement, and can I extend my condolences to all those who have lost loved ones. This has been a difficult year for us all, and our thoughts and condolences go out to all those that have lost a loved one. As the First Minister said, it is 12 months since the first COVID-19 case was identified in Scotland. And in that time, we have seen our frontline workers, our NHS staff, our social care staff and all our frontline workers continue to go above and beyond, and our heartfelt thanks to every single one of them and their families. The vaccine rollout is the light at the end of the tunnel, and it's great to see the evidence of its efficacy giving us all hope. But as lockdown restrictions begin to lift, I do urge the Scottish Government to also focus on our recovery, and I will support all efforts by the Government to bring our communities together and to rebuild our nation. That must be our collective priority for everyone across this Parliament. Presiding Officer, parents across the country are worried about their child's education and their child's mental health. Can the First Minister therefore confirm when our Government will set out details of a national recovery plan for Scotland's pupils and our education system? Figures published today on child and adolescent mental health services show that more than 1,500 children are on waiting lists already waited more than a year to be seen by a specialist, more than 1,500 children. And the last quarter, 25%, 1 in 4 children, had their referral rejected. What more can the Scottish Government do to give support to children who need it right now, particularly in crisis services? And finally, Presiding Officer, the Scottish Government has a target of 400,000 vaccinations a week, a target that I have welcomed and that I support. But the numbers from the last week in February show an average of around 29,000 vaccinations per day, and yesterday fewer than 23,000 people were vaccinated. And today the First Minister has suggested that already there's a potential of slowing vaccination rates going forward even further. When will we have that target met of 400,000 vaccinations a week, so we can collectively get out of this crisis.
First Minister.
Well, can I also take the opportunity to welcome Anas Sarwar to his place? I don't want to brag here, and I'd have to count, but I think I'm probably well above 5 when it comes to Labour leaders that I've faced across this chamber. Can I say, in all seriousness, there is also a historic nature to Anas Sarwar's election as leader of the Scottish Labour Party, and I think it speaks well of the diversity of our country. So for that reason, if for no other reason, I wish him well in the job. It also proves one other thing, because Anas and I will not just face off across the chamber as respective leaders of our parties. Of course, we are opponents in the constituency of Glasgow Southside. So I think we've just proven again over the last few days that Glasgow Southside is actually the centre of the universe, which I know everybody in the chamber will agree with as much as Anas and I do. But I wish him... I was going to say I wish him all the best. I wish him a modicum degree of success in the weeks ahead. On the questions he has asked me, in terms of a national recovery plan for education, the work to support recovery in education is already underway. The funding I've set out, the steps that we are supporting with local authorities, so provision, for example, of tutoring support through eSchool, the money we've made available for additional teachers, the extra funding for local authorities that they can use flexibly based on what they consider is the most appropriate way, and we will keep that under review. I have said, Deputy First Minister has said, supporting children to come through and to catch up, not just educationally, but in a whole range of ways from the experience of the last year, will be a long-term project. Similarly, on mental health, we've already published a mental health recovery plan. The Mental Health Minister will continue to keep Parliament updated. Before the pandemic, transforming and redesigning the provision of child and adolescent mental health services was a priority. So one of the things we had already made real progress on was mental health counsellors available for all secondary schools. That work needs to pick up and be intensified as a result of the experience of the pandemic. Finally, on vaccination, we exceeded the 400,000 a week when we had the supplies to do it. So the constraining factor right now, which is not within our control, is supply. The dip in daily vaccination rates in the last couple of weeks, which we flagged in advance, was entirely down to supply. If you look at numbers across the 4 nations, you will see that same dip. We expect that there might be another dip in supply next week. We don't expect that to affect the mid-April targets. But we're in a position now, I'm not complacent about this, it takes a lot of work by a lot of people across the entire country. We're in a position now to be able to go as fast as we have supplies to vaccinate people. The constraining factor is the supplies, and that is why we continue to talk regularly to the pharmaceutical companies to get as long-term a line of sight on their manufacturing and supply prospects as we can. But we'll vaccinate people just as fast as we have the vaccine to do it.
Thank you. Alison Johnson, to be followed by Willie Rennie.
Thank you, and may I too welcome Anas Sarwar to his new role as Labour leader. The Scottish Greens have long called for action to be taken to make our schools safe, particularly for regular testing for staff and senior pupils. Parliament voted in support of our proposals before Christmas, and I welcome that they've finally been delivered. Another proposal that we and the EIS have made is that teachers and school staff be vaccinated, be prioritised for vaccination. So far, this has only been accepted for some additional support needs staff, but even this isn't yet being delivered across Scotland as planned. I understand, for example, that special school teachers in Lothian have been turned down for vaccination. So can the First Minister clarify when all ASN staff will be vaccinated, and will her government take action to ensure this is delivered? Thank you.
First Minister.
I'll certainly look into the issue or the claimed issue of a particular problem in Lothian. Directors of Education have been asked to identify staff who fall into this category so that they can have vaccination as quickly as possible. But if there are particular issues, I say this across the chamber, if there are particular issues in particular parts of the country, make sure we are aware of them so that we can immediately go onto them and try to resolve them. And I'll come back, or I'll ask the Health Secretary to come back to Alison Johnson on that point. More broadly, we are following the advice and the recommendations of the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation. I think that is the right and the only thing to do. While supplies of vaccine are still constrained to some extent. We have to make choices about who gets vaccinated, and the expert advice is the right way to make those choices. We're following the initial prioritisation plan, which, as I've said before, we will be working to do as quickly as possible, and then we will move into the rest of the population, which the JCVI recommend continues to be done on an age basis. So teachers will be done in line with that priority. And of course, many teachers will already have been vaccinated if they fall in one of the categories that have already had priority. And many will be being vaccinated right now because they will fall within the category of people with underlying health conditions. And of course, we are working to do everybody over the age of 50 by mid-April, which I know is not every teacher, but then we move down the age range to have everybody vaccinated in the adult population by the end of July. But as soon as we start to depart from the expert advice, we start to make choices that are political, not expert-driven. And given the importance and the sensitivity of this, I think it's important that we stick to the clinical advice.
Willie Rennie to be followed by Ruth Maguire.
I welcome the changes for newborn babies. It's something that we on these benches have been arguing for some time. But perhaps it was unwise for the First Minister rather sneer at other governments for making up dates, when the dates that she set last week haven't lasted 7 days. The 3-week review has changed to a weekly review. And I want schools back as soon as possible. But the result of this last-minute change is that there is no guidance ready, and teachers have been left to clear up this issue and make it work. If 2/3 of the class will be at home because of the 2-metre physical distancing, how will teachers juggle the additional workload? There are no more hours in the day. So teachers are exhausted. They've been working incredibly hard with this remote learning. So is this the way to reward them?
First Minister.
With the greatest respect, I think Willie Rennie, I'll come on to the teacher point directly in a second, but his overall characterisation is just not correct. We have set dates, we are sticking to these dates, but we said last week that if the data allows it, we will accelerate. That is the right and proper way to do it. I said last week that we hoped that from the 15th of March, all primary school children would be back. We had to confirm that today, which I've done. And I think I said last week that we wanted to try to get as many secondary school pupils back as much as possible into school, and we've been working to confirm what I've just confirmed today. I think I said last week that next week I would confirm the other changes that we hope to make on the 15th of March, and then the week after that we would set out more time lines for the period after the 26th of April, which I've just confirmed all of that today. So that hasn't changed. What has changed, which is a good thing, is that the data is slightly more promising than it was when I stood here last week. Last week were looking at a plateauing of cases. That now seems to be back firmly into decline, which allows us to assess whether there are more things we can do earlier than we previously anticipated. That's the way we have always done this, and I think it is the right way to proceed. I have every respect and huge gratitude for what teachers have done over the past year. I don't doubt for a minute that they are exhausted in the way that many people working across many different sectors of our society will be, and we owe them a huge amount. I think most teachers want to see children back in school as quickly as possible. We have to do that in a phased way to make it safe. We listen very carefully to the views of teachers through the EIS, for example, and the Education Recovery Group, and we come to a balanced decision. But I can't imagine there are many people across the country right now who don't think it is right to prioritise the well-being and the education of young people. And I'm not suggesting Willie Rennie is doing that. But we need to be able to take decisions as quickly as we can and to try to get to a maximalist position with young people's education. Yes, that involves us all, and particularly those in the front line of education, having to adapt in order to accommodate that. But that, I think, is better than having a period of time where young people are unnecessarily out of school more than they need to be.
Thank you. Ruth Maguire to be followed by Liam Kerr.
Presiding Officer, I did listen carefully there to the First Minister's response to Alison Johnston, but I will still raise this issue that's been raised with me locally, as I think it's worth looking at the specifics. And the concern's been raised with me that some classroom assistants who provide close personal care for children with additional support needs are not being included in the vaccination programme. One worker told me that they feel the threshold for vulnerability is too high, and by not being vaccinated that they're putting the child in their care in harm's way. Could the First Minister say a little bit more about how vulnerability and risk is currently being assessed? And I wonder if the guidelines might be looked at to just check that there's not a gap within them. Thank you.
First Minister.
Of course, we're happy to look at the guidance if there is a sense that it is not covering sufficient numbers or categories of people. The guidance on this was issued on the 29th of January. It was shared with Chief Executive of all local authorities and clarified in terms of the inclusion of some education staff in the cohort 2, that staff working closely, very closely with children and young people with most complex additional support needs should be vaccinated with that order of priority. It sets out that staff should be offered the vaccination if they're supporting children and young people with complex healthcare needs requiring coordination and provision of support from education, health or social care services within school settings. Staff who are eligible will be staff who undertake regular healthcare and social care duties with multiple children or young people and moving and handling of them, all of which mean that they often work in very close proximity for prolonged periods of time, providing a range of interventions, including personal and intimate care. The most recent letter from the Chief Medical Officer to health boards issued on the 5th of February, and it included the same detail about how to identify eligible staff. So I think there is clear guidance there, but I'm happy to ask the Health Secretary to look into any particular concerns that Ruth Maguire or any other member might have. And if there's more detail that any member wants to pass to the Health Secretary, I would encourage them to do so.
Thank you. Liam Kerr, to be followed by Bruce Crawford.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. No one doubts the strain that COVID-19 has put on services, including within the prison service. Now, last summer, the government took a decision to release several hundred prisoners early as a response to the pandemic, but figures just out show that more than 40% of those released are already back in jail. So I warned at the time that the government needed to put a robust monitoring strategy in place to protect the public. So can I ask, why didn't it? And can the First Minister confirm whether, given the statistics she's just set out, there is any intention to release further prisoners early?
First Minister.
I'll ask the Justice Secretary to write with the details of monitoring that's in place. And I don't mean this flippantly, and I'm certainly happy to look into the detail of this more. But if it is the case that a proportion of prisoners having been released are back, that is not something we should take any pleasure in, of course, but it might suggest that there is actually monitoring of people and appropriate actions are being taken. So if it was the case that nobody was bothering about what prisoners who had been released were doing, then it may be the case that we wouldn't see that. But I'll ask the Justice Secretary to write with more detail. You know, some of what has been done throughout the pandemic has been inescapable. It's not been actions that any government would have wanted to take. All governments across the UK, I suspect many governments across the world, had to do similar things in relation to prisoners. As we face this new, more infectious variant, one of the risks that is already materialising is institutional spread, and that has manifested itself with some prison outbreaks in recent times. So this is not easy, and it is by far over in terms of some of these very vulnerable institutional settings. So some of these decisions that we've had to take in the past may require to be taken in the future as well, as we try to get through this with as limited transmission vulnerability as we possibly can.
Thank you. Bruce Crawford, to be followed by Jackie Bailey.
Thank you, President Officer. First Minister, I know that you're aware that the tourism industry is a crucial part of my Stirling constituency's economy, and that a large part of the sector is made up of small, self-catering guest houses and bed and breakfast operators. For such operators, their business provides their only income, for some of them anyway, and I know some are really struggling financially. Therefore, while some may receive strategic framework grants, can I ask on their behalf that the Scottish Government considers providing a one-off top-up grant to help ease the huge pressure they are under?
First Minister.
Well, tourism is central to the Scottish economy, and I know it's particularly central to constituencies like Bruce Crawford's. While many small accommodation providers will already be receiving support via the Strategic Framework Business Fund, I'm pleased to say that we have also agreed an expansion of a scheme to provide equivalent support to small accommodation providers who pay council tax. That's in recognition of the challenges on an ongoing basis that businesses such as B&Bs, guest houses and self-catering face, and it's intended to ensure that we reach as wide a range of businesses as possible, and there is a plan to release details of this by the end of this week, and beyond that we'll continue to review the support in place and work with businesses to explore all options.
Thank you. Jackie Bailey, to be followed by Rona Mackay.
Public Health Scotland statistics show that teachers have a 47% greater chance of getting COVID than the general population. We all want to get our children back to school as soon as possible, but all teachers and all school support staff need to be safe too, especially if we want to ensure continuity of education. So will the First Minister ensure that all teachers are vaccinated before the 15th of March, given the data from the experts at Public Health Scotland?
First Minister.
I'm not going to get into a debate about the interpretation of the data. There's a range of data about risk of transmission in schools, amongst teachers and amongst young people, and I think it is important not to oversimplify it. Suffice to say, the safety of teachers and everybody working in a school environment is paramount. That is why we are taking a phased approach to the return of schools and not taking the decision to put all secondary school pupils back full-time from the 15th of March, because in our judgment and the judgment of our expert advisors, that would be taking risks that were not appropriate. In terms of the question about vaccination, much as I would dearly love to stand here and agree every request that's made for priority vaccination, if I was to accede to that request, I would be driving a coach and horses through the JCVI expert clinical advice. And we'd be doing that in a way that no other government across the UK is doing. And while we have limited supplies of vaccine, and so we can't vaccinate everybody at once, we have to choose what the prioritisation basis is, and we have to do that on the basis of the best clinical advice. And the clinical advice is, as people know, for the first 1 to 9 cohort groups, and then the advice of the JCVI is to continue to do that based on age. Progressively, many teachers will have been vaccinated already, many will be getting vaccinated over the next couple of weeks, and then those in the younger age groups will be vaccinated as we move to do the whole adult population by the end of July. But every time, and I'm not making this comment particular to teachers, but every time we take somebody who is younger and fitter and therefore less clinically at risk of vaccination of the virus and vaccinate them ahead of somebody who is at more clinical risk, then we're making political choices that is not backed up by the clinical advice.
Thank you. Rona Mackay, to be followed by Donald Cameron.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. To ask the First Minister if she can provide an update on the number of care home residents who have received their second dose of the vaccine, and also if the supply of vaccine is likely to affect this.
First Minister.
So the latest figures we have show that just under 14,500 care home residents have now received their second dose, which is roughly 48% of residents in care homes for older people have completed the 2-dose schedule. We're now publishing weekly statistics on supply on the Scottish Government website, so people will also have transparency about the supply that is available. Obviously, we prioritise care homes. We prioritise them not just in the sense they were the first group that we vaccinated, but we spent a lot, or the vaccinators on our behalf, spent a lot of time and effort maximising the uptake of vaccine in care homes, and I think we are starting to see the benefit of that, given that the sharpest falls in mortality due to COVID have been in care homes as the vaccine starts to have its effect. So completing the second doses as quickly as possible will give residents and staff working in care homes an added layer of reassurance.
Thank you. Donald Cameron, to be followed by John Mason.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Several parents from island communities such as Mull and Isla have contacted me seeking an earlier full-time opening of schools on these islands than currently planned. Has the First Minister given any consideration to this beyond what has just been announced today, given the relatively low levels of COVID-19 cases on these islands? And will the Scottish Government consider the potential for a more general easing of restrictions on our islands in light of their particular circumstances?
First Minister.
Well, if I can point to what I said in my statement, because I think it's got particular relevance to the legitimate question that's been raised. I said that we will issue guidance, or Education Scotland will issue guidance on the phased return of secondary schools later this week. But within that guidance, we want local authorities to have a degree of flexibility in order that they can maximise the number of, or the time that secondary school pupils are spending in school in the period between now and Easter. So what that means is that in smaller authorities, island communities, for example, where there may be very small numbers of pupils going to a particular school, if all of them could be back full-time while the 2 metres distancing continues to be respected, then that's something a local authority should have flexibility over. The position of the government is we want, in the period between now and Easter, for secondary school pupils to have as much time as it is possible to give them physically in school. But that has to be consistent with the safety measures that still require to be in place. So there will be some parts of the country where that involves a greater degree of in-person school education than will be the case in some other parts of the country.
Thank you. John Mason, to be followed by Pauline McNeill.
Thank you very much. Many people are wanting the schools opened as soon as possible, but some parents and pupils and teachers are nervous about the risks that there might be in school. Can the First Minister offer any reassurance to parents, pupils and teachers in that position about PPE, testing and such like?
First Minister.
The main words of reassurance I want to give again are that we are taking all of these decisions very carefully. My position, and I suspect it's the position of most parents across the country, if not all parents across the country, is if it was safe to get children back into school full-time tomorrow, that's what they would want. But that would not be safe. So we have to do this on a phased basis, and that's the main thing that we're doing to make sure that safety is prioritised. Beyond that, we're in regular contact with unions, parent representative bodies about measures to reduce risks in schools. The COVID Education Recovery Group that the DFM chairs meets weekly. The guidance for schools is developed with input from all of these and other stakeholders, and it sets out very clear requirements around infection control measures, the use of PPE in appropriate circumstances. And as I said in my statement, we have introduced twice weekly at-home asymptomatic testing available to all school staff and senior phase pupils, which is another layer of assurance. So every step that can be taken to make sure that the school environment is as safe as possible will be taken. And as I said earlier on, I'm very grateful to everybody in the school community for all the work that they're doing to put these plans in place.
Pauline McNeill, to be followed by Shona Robertson.
There are many reports that vaccinators working same shifts at vaccine centres have vastly different rates of pay. Nurses with years of experience in vaccination in some cases paid up to a third less for the same work. So one nurse wrote to me and said, not only do contractors book shifts before nurses as we don't get direct access to the system, she went on to say, in my last shift I worked with dentists and optometrists. I was much faster, but I was paid a lot less. A GP also wrote to me to say he has the same concerns and that it's harming solidarity among staff due to this unfairness in pay rates. I wonder if the First Minister is able to take any action to ensure that pay rates are reflective of a person's skills. Can she do anything to urge health boards to ensure that there is fairness to nursing staff during the vaccination programme?
First Minister.
This has been raised with me. It's something I've actually asked to be looked at, so I can't give any definitive answer right now, but I recognise the sense of unfairness. In summary, and apologies if I'm not getting all the detail of this right, the rate that a vaccinator will be paid is based on the rate of pay in the job that they do. And obviously, and I'm not making any comment about the fairness or unfairness of this, certain workers in health and social care roles are paid more than others, and that is reflected in the rate of pay that they have for vaccination. Given, though, the particular circumstances of vaccination, there is certainly a question mark in my mind as to whether that is fair, which is why, given that it's been raised with me, I've asked for that to be looked at, and once it has been looked at and I've got more detail I can offer, I'm happy to come back to Pauline McNeill and the Chamber at large.
Thank you. Shona Robertson, to be followed by Liz Smith.
Thank you. Can I also welcome the clarification in the First Minister's statement for parents of newborn babies? But can I ask the First Minister what discussions the Scottish Government has had with councils and out-of-school care providers to ensure that these vital services will be able to resume when it is safe to do so?
First Minister.
Well, the rules already allow informal childcare to be provided where there's an essential childcare need, which we understand is one of the reasons that other governments have made changes around this too. I hope this answered Shona Robertson's point. As I said in my statement, we will make clear that there is an extension to essential purposes, and we will continue to work with providers to make sure, in terms of formal childcare, that this is reflected in practice and that the support that is required is made available.
Liz Smith, to be followed by Claire Adamson.
Thank you. The Scottish Government last week made a very welcome announcement that non-contact sports for 12 to 17-year-olds can resume on the 15th of March. Could I ask the First Minister to confirm that schools on that date, 15th of March, will be able to open all the facilities for their sports and games field to allow that to happen?
First Minister.
I think certainly the answer I want to give to that, and I think the correct answer to give to that is yes. I'll double check that there is not any caveats to that or any restrictions to that, but of course we want to be able to facilitate that to the full, because it is one of the important ways in which we can try to redress the well-being imbalance that's been created for too many young people across the country.
Thank you. Claire Adamson, to be followed by Michelle Ballantyne.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. First Minister, my office has been contacted by third sector support workers providing a variety of services to vulnerable people, but including food preparation and delivery. But these workers in my area of Motherwell and Wishaw are not being identified as vaccine priorities by the Health Board. Can I ask the First Minister to ensure that NHS boards, in reaching their understanding of how these workers should be prioritised, is consistent with both the Joint Committee on Vaccine Immunisation guidance, but also consistently across Scotland?
First Minister.
I'm happy to look into this just to make sure I can come back with the answer that it is consistent across Scotland. It certainly should be broadly consistent. The Health Secretary will look into that a bit more. All of these decisions are being guided by the JCVI prioritisation list. There are some issues. We've just been talking about one with people who work very closely with children with multiple complex health needs, where we have defined a particular category as including them. We have taken a similar decision with people with mild to moderate learning disabilities, where previously it was only people with complex learning disabilities that were included. So we are trying to flex each cohort sensibly and as much as possible, but we have to stick as far as we can to those lists so that we are genuinely vaccinating those with greatest clinical needs as early as possible in the prioritisation list. But perhaps the most important point to make in all of these questions about vaccination is that everyone will have been offered first doses by mid-April for that initial JCVI prioritisation list. And just to repeat, that is everybody above the age of 50 and everybody with an underlying health condition, a significant proportion of the adult population. So that's by mid-April, and then by the end of July, supplies permitting, all adults will have been offered a first dose.
Michelle Ballantyne, to be followed by Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. A constituent of mine, a merchant seafarer who left Scotland to join his cargo ship before the quarantine rules were introduced, now finds himself unable to continue his job unless he accepts not returning to his home and family and pays most of his salary in quarantine costs between ships. Today, he arrived at Edinburgh Airport to be told that he cannot be quarantined in Edinburgh, but will be bussed to Paisley. This has not only added to his deteriorating mental health due to the stress of a lack of shore leave since the outbreak of the pandemic and the stress of the impact of the quarantine rules, he has been running an 80-metre loop of his ship's deck to help manage his well-being, and the prospect of 10 days locked up without exercise or fresh air is now devastating. So can I ask the First Minister, is she aware that there appears to be no rooms for managed quarantine in Edinburgh? And will she give permission for my constituent, who has now been forced out of his job by the decision not to allow him to quarantine at home, to at least run in the fresh air during his 10-day forced quarantine to prevent his mental health and well-being deteriorating further?
First Minister.
I'm not going to comment on the individual case because I don't have all of the details of it. If Michelle Ballantyne wants to send them to my office this afternoon, I will make sure they are looked into. I will also look into the issue of whether there is an inadequacy of rooms at Edinburgh requiring people to go to Paisley, or obviously to help. I imagine that means to hotels in the vicinity of Glasgow Airport. I'm not aware of that, but I'm happy to look into that. Can I ask Michelle Ballantyne, though, and I say this sincerely, is for those of us in positions of responsibility like this, not to describe managed quarantine as being locked up with no fresh air and exercise. This is a vital public health intervention right now. People are entitled to fresh air and exercise. But the reason we are insisting on quarantine, I think, was really well demonstrated at the weekend when we identified these first cases in Scotland of the Brazilian variant. And we worry that these variants, as they come in, will undermine the vaccine and all the good work everybody has been doing. So this is there for a reason. Nobody wants to be asking people to quarantine for 1 day, 2 days, 10 days or whatever, but it is an essential part of the protective measures we need to put in place. I think we've all got a responsibility to help explain that to constituents and also help to encourage people to see the need for it. Nobody is expecting anybody to be happy about any of this right now, but I think we do need to explain and help people to understand the reasons for it. But on the individual case, the circumstances her constituent are in clearly sound very distressing, and I have huge sympathy for that. And for that reason, I'm happy to look into the case. But it's not for me individually as First Minister to give people permission not to comply with these things. It's really important that we do these things properly and decisions are based on the right considerations.
Thank you. And Rhoda Grant.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Businesses that pay business rates can claim £2,000 a month from the Strategic Business Fund, and this follows from grants already paid. All of this has been necessary for their survival. Businesses that don't pay business rates have similar overheads and have received nothing. They hope to access one-off discretionary grants from local government of £2,000 to compensate them for a year of disruption and closure. Many of these businesses have already permanently closed their doors due to lack of support. I've raised this issue with the First Minister and other Cabinet Secretaries for many months now, and I make no apology for raising it again. So again, can I ask the First Minister, when will she offer these businesses a safety net?
First Minister.
The reason first thing I should say, it's an important point, and I understand how difficult this is for all businesses, but particularly businesses in the category that have been described. But that is why we established the discretionary funding route for local authorities. We have since significantly increased the money that goes to local authorities for that, to give them the ability to flexibly provide for businesses that fall through the cracks of the other support schemes. In addition to that, we will continue to look at how we fill those cracks and within the resources we have to make sure that we are helping as many individuals and businesses as we can. The most important thing, though, is to get businesses back trading as quickly as possible, which is why it's so important to continue to suppress the virus, get people vaccinated so that as quickly as possible we get the economy opened and businesses making money through their normal trading rather than relying on the support that government is providing.
Thank you very much, colleagues. And that is the end of that statement. Apologies to members who weren't able to call. We're just going to have a short pause and we're going to clean some of the seats and desks to allow ministers and others to change round. So there'll be a short pause before we proceed.